Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Scale Smart, Grow Fast podcast. Scaling a business shouldn't require you to be the bottleneck. In this episode, Eden Lovejoy, creator of the Virtual GM Matrix and Fractional COO to high growth companies, shares how leaders can transition out of the day-to-day operations by empowering their teams, installing scalable systems, and embracing a true visionary mindset. With over 30 years of business leadership and a track record of helping companies generate millions in revenue, Eden's going to deliver a practical framework for delegation, leadership development, and sustainable growth. Eden, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Harley. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Eden, for our audience out there that isn't familiar with your background, could you elaborate a little bit further, kind of share what's brought you along in this journey to what you're doing today?
Sure, absolutely. Happy to. My journey to where I'm at today really starts from being a child in a very chaotic environment. I grew up, I was the oldest of 4 kids, and my leadership of a very small team. And my family was in a lot of chaos in San Francisco in the 70s. So my mom was looking for the answer and things were changing all the time. And so I developed a preference for organization and structure and consistency that turns out years later, I discovered, oh, no wonder I'm so inspired and motivated to do what I do. But on a more practical level, as a young woman, I started working. I took a gap year before going to school, a couple of years actually, and realized that I definitely wanted to work in the small to mid-sized business environment. Like, I like the diversity of it. I like the challenge of it. I like the entrepreneurial energy of it. I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. And over the years, found myself in that operational, organizational, streamlining role. Like to say I'm a general manager by craft and inclination, or GM or COO, depending on the corporate structure. But I always wanted to touch more companies than just one at a time. I never was interested in just having a job and doing one thing. So over the years, as I worked with various companies, I kept track. I paid attention. Like, what are the things that I do that make the most difference as a central function of operational leadership? What are the key things that need to be in place for us to be successful? And pulled all of those together into the Virtual GM Matrix. My goal is to translate the skill set of that central operational leadership into functionality in a strong team. We diversify that skill set so we can lean out overhead, improve operations, and build high-performing cultures is the end result.
So thank you for sharing that background. And before we started recording, we talked a little bit about mindset, and you were mentioning how mindset is usually a big challenge with people really stepping into these new roles and making these changes that they need to. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Mindset is everything. I've discovered over time, like, I can only coach someone so far until they hit an internal mindset block. And it's interesting, when I find my clients, generally they're in a place where they have built their team, they've got a team around them, and over the years they keep adding, they keep growing, and they get to a point where they realize it doesn't seem to matter how I structure this team, I never get relief, right? I'm harder than ever. And when we look at what's going on there, quite often we find that they're working harder than ever because they have not delegated any authority. Like, everybody's always coming to the owner or the owner for answers to questions that they shouldn't have to be answering by the time they're at 10 or 15 or 25 employees, but they've not moved into the mindset of trusting authority in the team. So we have to shift the mindset in order to be able to delegate effectively, have to learn to trust, to let people make mistakes, and maybe even more importantly, to not be afraid to lose our value as leaders. Because when it gets down to it, when an owner begins delegating, they find themselves in this awkward position of like, now what am I supposed to be doing? You and I know that the opportunity is to be moving into strategic visionary leadership, but there's like a sense of guilt or a sense of, like, whatever the underlying story is, there's a resistance to actually getting free of doing operational tasks. And we got to get past that in order to create real successful growth.
Absolutely. One thing that I've kind of noticed over the years is just, they're not going to say it, but oftentimes people communicate that they maybe feel guilty or something if they've delegated stuff that they used to do, or if they get to a point where they have a great team handling things and maybe they don't have to do so much anymore, and they feel like this guilt, like, oh, they need to be doing busy work to like lead the team. How do you help people address that?
I think we see that guilt especially in leaders who, they really care about their people, and they have this sense that they don't want to be on a pedestal or like differentiate, right? It's a very egalitarian mindset. Like, we're all equal, we're all contributing. It is accurate that every member of the team is equally important. I like to tell the story of a muscle truck, driving down the road. It's easy to see that the drivetrain and the big, huge tires and the engine are driving that. But if a tiny little electrical part like the solenoid goes out, it stops in its tracks, right? So we get to honor the contribution of everyone in the system. What owners don't know or entrepreneurs don't know is that the team is looking for someone to be in that role of true leadership. They don't need to see you working side by side with them on the front lines to appreciate your contribution. The contribution of leadership is a practical skill set that can be developed and is necessary. And the team is looking for that. They want you to be in that. They want to be trusted to handle the small things. They want to support you in being able to think and be visionary. And so it's about shifting the perspective on what the team is looking for from their leadership in order to create value. And then it's about recognizing a part of it too is it's actually easier to do the small work. The first time I hired someone for my team, one afternoon I was sitting towards the end of the day. At the end of the day, I liked to lower energy and like to do housekeeping things, filing or whatever. And I kind of looked around and realized that everything easy to do had been delegated to somebody else. And the only thing left on my plate was things to be thoughtful about. What do I do? You have to learn how to work in a different way.
Right. Another area that comes up often, and you've talked about this, is like the principle of becoming a bottleneck. And what are some early signs that you can help people identify when they are the bottleneck in their growth and improving things with their operations?
Well, I think one of the early signs is that sense of being overwhelmed. When you have a team around you and you find yourself being overwhelmed, then you have to look at why that is and what you have on your plate that ought not to be there. Another is if you're hearing people come to you with questions that your first thought is you should be able to answer that, then you've created a bottleneck and not yet effectively supported the team in stepping up into the leadership for the role that they're in. I guess those are two early indicators.
Perfect. Now, I want to talk more about the virtual GM matrix. Can you maybe tell us more about what that is and how it works?
Sure. It's got three major components. The first is the cultural framework. The end goal is that we can trust as owners that our staff or our team will make the same decision that we would make if we're out of the room or out of the country, right? That in an ideal world, my team will make the same decisions in any given moment that I would make if I were there. So that's what we're up to. So the cultural framework, which is mission, vision, and values, those components of truly articulate what drives the owner of the company, create a framework for decision making. And it's maybe not just as much about having those in place, but how we utilize those and bring those alive and into action in the day-to-day of the company. That's the first set. The second component of the matrix is looking at the organizational structure and really identifying where those multiplicity is, right? Where do we have one person doing three things, and what's the right structure and the right line of supervision and building in a line of decision-making authority within the team. A lot of times I'll do an org chart for folks and I'll put in Jane will be blue. And so we can see everywhere that Jane's working. And if Jane's the owner of the company, usually they're working at the front line, the midline, the top line, and somewhere else in between, right? And so we can start to clear that out and organize it and get people in their right roles and authorities and accountabilities, really giving people ownership. And what happens when we do that is that people begin to hold each other accountable. And so all that pressure on top leadership gets delegated when the team is holding each other accountable and everybody's inside their right space. And then the third component is the feedback loops and growth patterns. The third section of steps in the matrix is about making sure that, delegation is not abandonment. We can't just say, okay, now you've got it, and then disappear. We want to have those feedback loops built in and a solid plan for growth and how we handle new ideas and test those and really build a system where then the leader is supported in not being the only idea generator on the team.
Yeah, I wanted to ask more about the decision-making delegation, and you talked about having values and the mission, the vision, and making that be clear. One thing I've heard many times in the past and has helped us is when your values are clear, decisions become easy. Can you talk more about how you help instill like the mission, vision, and values with the team so they are able to make decisions the same way you would, even if you're not there?
Yeah. And one of the founders of Travelocity said, culture is a contact sport. I love that line. And so largely it's about putting in place practices that at first seem awkward. It seems goofy to say, oh, let's talk about this value in everything that we're doing, or let's look at the values every week. We have in our coaching, our certification program for the team, we have a number of exercises, right? We can do values-based contests. We can bring it into conversation in every development conversation, which values compare, which values is someone excelling in and which values are they maybe needing to build more strength in. So it's about bringing them alive into every dialogue, not just saying to somebody, hey, you did this wrong, but instead we build a collaborative environment where like, hey, when we look at this decision that was made and consider this value that clearly didn't support the value very well, how can we do that differently? So it's a series of small things that bring it into actual practice and into vocabulary. I like to remind people, if you're traveling in Europe, how do you know what country you're in for language? So inside our companies, we can build actually our own language around the values and it becomes over time ingrained in everything we do. And we're not having to think about it so much as just knowing what those values are from the language that we're in.
Every day, your top performers are buried under emails, scheduling, and reporting. Work that doesn't move the needle. The result? Frustration, burnout, and worst of all, lost revenue. That's why we created the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers, a simple, battle-tested framework to eliminate busy work and unlock your team's full potential. Inside, you'll get the exact steps top executives use to retain A players, boost productivity, and free up their team for high-impact work. Stop losing revenue. Go to workergenics.com/growthhub or check the episode notes to download the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers now. Part of the things you talked about too was when you start delegating, it's not just, letting go of everything immediately. You still have to have that feedback loop, and that's something that's part of your matrix that you help people with. Can you talk more about what does that feedback loop look like? Is it just are you just using like technology to help give feedback? Is there actual frameworks for, having regular meetings? What do you recommend people do there?
Really depends on the mission, vision, and values of the company, the client company, right? So one of the things that's true about the virtual GM matrix is it's not a cookie cutter process, because it needs to be built around the actual culture of the company that we're supporting. And I think we all do it, right? As owners, we know the things that we're tracking that give us a sense of leading indicators if things are going well or if they're not, if they're being challenged. So first is, identifying that list, and then look at, sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's report backs, it's a schedule of meetings with people. Generally, it's a variety of things. And one company might need to be focused very closely on receivables. Another may have all cash transactions, point of sale, and need to read their trending reports. So just, it needs to be thoughtfully built for the environment.
One thing you've talked about is like working with your business, not just on it. What does that mindset shift look like in action?
Yeah. Up until now, since the 80s, we've been saying that you should work on your business, not in it. That is what I consider to be an old paradigm today. But up until now, we've really only had two ideas. One is that I have to own it. I have to do all of the operational leadership myself, or two, I have to hire a single person, a GM or COO, to handle that operational leadership for me. And those are working on or in the business. To work with the business is to build authority across the team and build those skill sets of leadership across your midline leadership effectively. So what we're doing is replacing that central operational role in some sense, depending on the size of the company, and really letting the team grow to work collaboratively together. And, I hesitate to say collaboratively because I don't want people to think that I mean managing by consensus. I do not mean that, because managing by consensus is really managing to the lowest common denominator, right? So I'm not suggesting that that's the strategy. But when we have a complete set of values, there's creative tension between those. And when people have the voice to advocate for the right decision for the company from their perspective, and that's all based around values and mission, then we're duplicating the process of what happens in the mind or the skill set of central operational leadership. And so working with people, it's about working with the generations that we have on board now who want to be worked with. They don't want to be worked on. They want to be recognized and appreciated. So we have to give them a framework for their advocacy, for their position and their perspective so that they're coming at it correctly, and then support them in wrangling that and building that leadership across a group of people. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. One thing we always like to talk about is scaling, and you've helped companies install systems that scale. What's one process that most leaders either skip or underestimate when they're looking to scale?
That's a great question. The misperception about scaling is that it's going to be about doing more of the same, that we're going to be able to take the existing systems and just multiply them exponentially. And that's not true. And if we really want to scale, then we have to have the flexibility of thought. You've probably heard it said that sometimes the people who got you where you are not the people who can take you forward. Sometimes the systems that got you where you are not the systems that can take you forward. But when you're really thinking about scaling, you have to be able to think about leapfrogging over what it is that you've been doing as a system or a process to be able to create what can support you to that next level of growth. I think often people are thinking of things a little too simplistically, like scaling is just more of the same. And in fact, scaling is about doing something completely new from a foundation of what you've built today.
What are some maybe red flags or indicators that you often see when you're helping people that a system that took them where they are isn't going to take them where they want to go? And what can they be on the lookout for?
Well, when's the last time you really sat down and looked at the systems? I mean, as companies grow, you're building the airplane while you're flying it. And so you're building the system and sometimes cobbling things together, right? Add this piece, add that piece, add those pieces. If you're really at that launch point to scale, if you haven't sat down and really looked at the structure of all of the operating systems that you have in place recently, now would be a good time to do it.
Yeah. One thing that we try to do internally is ask ourselves, is the thing that we're doing today, would it work, or how badly would it break, or how painful would it be if we had to do 10 times as much of it, or the thing that it's trying to handle, had 10 times as much volume going through. And that's been very helpful in thinking about things differently. Are there little tricks like that or other things that you kind of help people with to kind of put a stress test on their systems and see if they are going to stay or if it is time to try something else?
My focus is on teaching people how to think about that rather than having specific tests for them to do. But there is included in the matrix is a framework of decision making for growth that's about not just taking the idea and running with it, but making sure that it's vetted well internally. And that involves all of those checks and balances so rather than having particular tests and things, the GM matrix is more about teaching people how to think about that. So how to test an idea and make sure that we're, not taking anything for granted, but really test, a system of intentional questioning that will get you to the right answer and get the team involved in answering that question accurately. I mean, there's so many times that what we have is the best tool. And again, I'm not advocating that we're changing our tools all the time. I mean, the way software is changing, you could be changing platforms, every week. And I have clients who are changing. So, this will be better. That'll be the better mousetrap, right? That'll be the better mousetrap. And that's exhausting for the team and it doesn't give you any momentum. But periodically doing a thoughtful consideration of have things evolved? Is there new evolution of software that can support our activities more robustly? Or what are we missing in what's currently available is really valuable. And we want to teach people how to ask those questions thoughtfully without just randomly jumping in and trying to make change without considering the impact.
I love that, teaching people how to ask the right questions. And for leaders who are listening today and they're feeling exhausted or maybe stuck, what's one question you would recommend they ask themselves or maybe their team or about their business to help them start reclaiming their time and building their business towards something that can really provide the freedom and scale and growth that they're looking for?
Well, the question that I ask myself when I get in those moments of overwhelm, and I own 4 operating companies, so I have moments where that happens. We all do. I mean, first, just ask the question, what am I doing that I really don't want to be doing? What is it that's on my plate that's not speaking to my heart, my strength, my passion, my vision? And how do I figure the next follow-up question, of course, is, okay, then where does that need to go in order for me to be able to move into the space that I want to be in?
Eden, you have shared so much valuable insight, great questions for people to think about on this episode. If people want to continue the conversation or learn more about you or your book, what's the best way for them to get connected?
Best way to connect with me is to go to freebusinessbook.com, and there's no S at the end of that book, freebusinessbook.com, and download a free version of e-version of the book. My goal is to get this information out to as many business owners as I can. So I want to gift to everyone on this call and on this podcast a copy of that book, and easy way to connect with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that generous gift to everyone who's listening. And if you're listening and you got value from this episode, do one quick thing. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss future strategies to help you scale smarter. And maybe you know a business owner or colleague who could use this information. Share the episode with them. It could be exactly what they need right now. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, leave us a quick rating. It helps us reach more leaders just like you. And thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you all on the next one.